Okay, looks like I am live. This is the final 2 chapters of Where the Red Fern Grows. This is the last recording for this. I'll probably make more at some point, maybe not for this boat. I don't know. I don't know how long I'll be here. I don't know how much free time I'll have. And on top of that, I have to do these when you're not around. So it's like free time where I can't talk to you because I'd rather invest my free time talking to you. But yeah, should be the last one. I'll definitely need a little bit of a break because my throat is getting dry. I took like a 10-minute break between this, just drink some water, like do some stuff, whatever. So they did say the boat was not going, but it was Curtis, which is someone I don't actually know. And then nothing, like no one's replied to it. So I have nothing on my WhatsApp. So I don't know if I trust this. Part of me thinks my WhatsApp broke, and I should like literally an hour ago, someone said we're not going under, and no one has responded. So I'm starting to think I can't trust it and that I'm not getting the messages. So I'm just going to check real quick on my phone, on my computer. I don't know why I didn't do this before, but I just don't. Literally no reply. I don't know what these fuckers are doing, but no one seems to care that we're not going under, except for me. But anyways, you have an hour and 18 minutes left on your flight. So I will definitely finish this before you get back. Maybe get like 30 minutes to rest my voice. Probably just walk around the hotel. I don't know. I got some time. Maybe just putts, do something. Yeah. I will be finishing where the red fern grows, and I'm sure we're going to get to the old yeller portion, as you called it, in this section. I really thought it was going to come sooner, but it sounds about right. Yeah. I love you. And if you do listen to these, I do hope you enjoy them. I don't know if you actually will. But yeah. Love you. I'm going to start reading the book and finish it up. Where the Red Fern Grows, Chapter 19. Although the winning of the cups and the money was a big event in my life, it didn't change my hunting any. I was out after the ringtails every single night. I'd been hunting the river bottoms hard for about 3 weeks. On that night, I decided to go back to the cyclone timber country. I barely reached the hunting ground when my dogs struck a trail. Old Dan opened up first. They struck the trail on a ridge and then dropped down into a deep canyon, up the other side and broke out into some flats. I could tell that the scent was hot from their steady bawling. 3 times they treed the animal. Every time I came close to the tree, the animal would jump, and the race would be on. After a while, I knew it wasn't a coon. I decided it was a bobcat. I didn't like to have my dogs tree the big cats, for their fur wasn't any good. All I could expect was 2 cut-up hounds. They could kill the largest bobcat in the hills, and had on several occasions, but to me it was useless. The only good I could see in killing one was getting rid of a vicious predatory animal. The 4th time they treed, they were on top of a mountain. After the long chase, I figured the animal was winded and would stay in the tree. In a trot, I started to them. As I neared the tree, Little Ann came to me, reared up, and whined. By her actions, I knew something was wrong. I stopped. In the moonlight, I could see old Dan sitting on his haunches, staring up at the tree and bawling. The tree had lots of dead leaves on it. I knew it was a large white oak, because it was one of the last trees in the mountains to lose its leaves. Old Dan kept bawling. Then he did something he had never done before. For seconds, his deep voice was still, and silence settled over the mountains. My eyes wandered from the tree to him. His lips were curled back, and he snarled as he stared into the dark foliage of the tree. His teeth gleamed white in the moonlight. The hair on his neck and along his back stood on end. A low, deep, rumbling growl rolled from his throat. I was scared, and I called to him. I wanted him to get away from there. Again I called, but it was no use. He wouldn't leave the tree. For in his veins flowed the breeded blood of a hunting hound. In his fighting heart there was no fear. I set the lantern down and tightened my grip on the handle of my axe. Slowly I started walking towards him. I thought if I can get close enough to him, I can grab his collar. I kept my eyes on the tree as I edged forward. Little Ann stayed by my side. She too was watching the tree. Then I saw them. 2 burning, yellow eyes staring at me from the shadowy foliage of the tree. I stopped, petrified with fear. The deep baying of old Dan stopped, and again the silence closed in. I stared back at the unblinking eyes. I could make out the bulk of a large animal crouched on the huge branch, close to the trunk of the big tree. Then it moved. I heard the scratch of razor-sharp claws on the bark. It stood up and moved out of the shadows onto the limb. I saw it clearly as it passed between the moon and me. I knew what it was. It was the devil cat of the Ozarks, the mountain lion. The silence was shadowed by one long, loud bawl from old Dan. I never heard my dog bawl like that. It was different. His voice rang out over the mountains loud and clear. The vibration of the deep tones rolled in the deep silence of the frosty night, on and on out of the flats, down in the canyons, and died away in the rim rocks like the cry of a lost soul. Old Dan had voiced his challenge to the devil cat. There was a low cough and a deep growl from the lion. I saw him crouch. I knew what was coming. My hands felt hot and sweaty on the smooth ash handle of the axe. With a blood-curdling scream, he sprang from the tree with claws outspread and long, yellow fangs bared. Old Dan didn't wait. Ran up on his hind legs, he met the lion in the air. The heavy weight bowled him over and over. He wound up in a fallen treetop. The impact of the two bodies threw the lion off balance. Little Ann darted in. Her aim was true. I heard the snap of her steel-trapped jaws as I closed in on his throat. With a squall of pain and rage, the big cat rolled over on his side, dragging Little Ann with him. His right paw reached out and curved over her shoulder. Sinews tightened and razor-sharp claws dug inward. With a cry of pain, she loosened her hold. I saw the blood squirting from the deep wound in her shoulder. She ignored it and bored back into the fight. Old Dan, stunned for an instant from the impact of the lion's body, fought his way from the treetop. Bawling the cry of the damned, he charged back in. I went berserk and charged into the fight. There in the flinty hills of the Ozarks, I fought for the lives of my dogs. I fought with the only weapon I had, the sharp cutting blade of a double-bladed axe. Screaming like a madman with tears running down my face, I hacked and chopped at the big snarling mountain cat. Once, feeling the bite of the sharp blade, the devil cat turned on me. His yellow-slitted eyes burned with hate. The long, lithe body dipped low to the ground. Shoulder muscles knotted and bulged. I tried to jump back, but my foot slipped and dropped to my knees. I knew I was trapped. With a terrifying scream, he sprang. I never saw my dogs when they got between the mountain lion and me, but they were there. Side by side, they rose up from the ground as one. They sailed straight into those jaws of death, their small, red bodies taking the ripping, slashing claws meant for me. I screamed and charged back into the fight, swinging my axe, but I was careful not to hit one of my dogs. The battle raged on and on, down the side of the mountain, over huckleberry bushes, fallen logs, and rocks. It was a rolling, tumbling mass of fighting fury. I was in the middle of it all, falling, screaming, crying, and hacking away at every opportunity. I had cut the big cat several times. Blood showed red on the bit of the axe, but as yet I had not gotten in the fatal lick. I knew it had to be soon, for my dogs were no match against the razor-sharp claws and the long yellow fangs. The screams of the big cat and the deep bellowing voice of my dogs echoed through the mountains as if the demons of hell had been turned loose. Down the side of the mountains, the terrible fight went on, down to the very bottoms of the canyon. The big cat had old Dan by the throat. I knew he was seeking to cut the all-important vein, the jugular. At the pitiful ball of old Dan, Little Ann, throwing caution to the wind, ran in and sank her teeth into the lion's tough neck. With her claws digging into the mountain soil, she braced herself and started pulling. The muscles in her small legs nodded and quivered. She was trying hard to pull the devil cat's vein from the throat of old Dan. In the rays of a bright Ozark moon, I could see clearly. For an instant, I saw the broad back of the big cat. I saw the knotty bulge of steel-bound muscle, the piston-like jerk of the deadly hind claws trying for the downward stroke that could disembowel a cat. Raising the axe high over my head, I brought it down with all my strength in my body. My aim was true. Behind the shoulders and the broad muscular back, the heavy blade sank with a sickening sound. The keen edge cleaved through the tough skin. It seemed to hiss as it sliced its way through bone and bristle. I left the axe where it was, sunk to the eye in the back of the devil cat. He loosened his hold on the throat of Dan. With a scream of pain, he reared up on his hind legs and started pawing the air. Little Ann dangled from the neck, still holding on. Her eyes were shut tight and her small feet were dragged, digging and clawing at the body. Old Dan, spewing blood from a dozen wounds, leaped high in the air. His long, red body sailed in between the outspread paws of the lion. I heard the snaps of his powerful jaws as they closed on the throat. The big cat screamed again. Blood gurgled and sprayed, and a bright red mist had rained out over the underbrush and rattled like sleet on the white oak leaves. In a boxer's stance, he stood and clawed the air. His slitted eyes turned green with hate. He seemed to be unaware of the two hounds hanging from his body, and kept staring at me. I stood in a trance and stared back at that ghastly scene. The breath of life was slowly leaving him. He was dying on his feet, but refusing to go down. My axe handle stuck straight out from his back, blood gushing from the mortal wound, glistening in the moonlight. A shudder ran through his body. He tried once again to scream. Blood gurgled in his throat. It was the end of the trail for the scourge of the mountains. No more would he scream his challenge from the rim rocks to the valley below. The small, harmless calves and the young colts would be safe from his silent stalk. He fell toward me. It seemed that with his last effort, he was still trying to get at me. As his heavy body struck the ground, something exploded in my head. I knew no more. When I came to, I was sitting down. It was silent and still. A bird, disturbed by the flight, started chirping far up on the side of the mountain. A small winter breeze rustled some dead leaves in the deep canyon. A cold, crawling chill crept over my body. I looked over at the lion. My dogs were still glued to his lifeless body. In his dying convulsion, the axe had become dislodged from the wound. It lay there in the moonlight, covered with blood. My numb brain started working. I thought of another time that the axe had been covered with blood. I don't know why I thought of Reuben Pritchard at that time, or why I thought of these words I had often heard. There was a little good in all evil. I got to my feet and went over to my dogs. I knew I had to inspect them to see how badly they were hurt. It wasn't too hard to get little Anne to loosen her hold. I examined her body. She was cut in several places, but nothing fatal. The only bad wound she had was in her shoulder. It was 9 inches long and down to the clean white bone. She started licking it immediately. It was different with old Dan. Try as I might, he wouldn't turn loose. Maybe he could remember the night in the cave when he was a pup, how the big cat screamed and how he had bawled back at him. I took hold of his hind legs and tried to pull him loose. It was no use. He knew that the hold he had was a deadly one and he wasn't going to let it go. I tried to tell him it was all over, that the lion was dead, to turn loose as I wanted to see how badly he was hurt. He couldn't understand and wouldn't even open his eyes. He was determined to hold on until the body turned cold and stiff. With my axe handle, I pried apart his locked jaws. Pulling onto his collar, I let him off to one side. I couldn't turn him loose, as I knew if I did, he would go back to the lion. With one hand, I started examining him. I ran my fingers through the short red hair. I could feel the quivering muscles and the hot, sweaty skin. He was a bloody mess. His long, velvety ears were shredded. His entire body was a mass of deep, raw, red wounds. On both sides of his rib cage, the sharp claws had laid the flesh open to the bone. His friendly old face was pitiful to see. A razor-sharp claw had ripped down an angle across his right eye. It was swollen shut. I wondered if he would ever see from that eye again. Blood dripped from his wounds and fell on the white oak leaves. I saw he was bleeding to death. With tears running down my cheeks, I did the only thing a hunter could do. I raked the leaves away and let his blood drip on the black mountain soil. Mixing it into a mud, I worked it into his wounds to stop the flow of blood. With my axe in one hand and old Neander's collar with the other, we climbed out of the canyon. I knew if I could get him far enough away from the lion, he wouldn't go back. On reaching the top, I saw the yellow glow of my lantern. I turned old Dan loose and walked over and picked it up. Not knowing exactly where I was, I looked down out of the mountains to get my bearings. Beyond the foothills and fields, I could see the long, white, crooked line of steam marking the river's course. Following the snake-like pattern with my eyes, in no time I knew exactly where I was, for I knew every bend in the river. Anxious to get home so I could take care of my dogs, I turned to call to them. Sorry, thought there was news. Little Anne was close by. She was sitting down, looking at the wound in her shoulder. I saw the shadowy form of old Dan sniffing around the tree where the lion had been treed. As I stood and watched him in the moonlight, my heart swelled with pride. Wounded though he was, he wanted to make sure there were no more lions around. I called to him. In a stiff-legged trot, he came to me. I called hold of his collar and gave him another inspection. In the lantern light, I could see the mud-caked wounds clearly. The bleeding had almost stopped. I felt much better. Little Anne came over. I knelt down and put my arms around them. I knew that if it hadn't been for their loyalty and unselfish courage, I would have probably been killed by the slashing claws of the devil cat. I don't know how I'll ever pay you back for what you've done, I said, but I'll never forget it. Getting up, I said, come on, let's go home so I can take care of those wounds. I hadn't gone far when I heard a cry. At first I thought it was a bird or a nighthawk. I stood still and listened. I glanced at little Anne. She was looking behind me. I turned around and looked for old Dan. He was nowhere in sight. The cry came again, low and pitiful. Instantly, little Anne started back the way we had come. I followed as fast as I could run. I found old Dan lying on his side, pleading for help. What I saw was almost more than I could stand. There, tangled in the low branches of a huckleberry bush, were the entrails of my dog. With a gasping cry, I knelt down by his side. I knew what had happened. Far back in the soft belly, the slashing, razor-sharp claws of the lion had cut into the hollow. In my inspections, I had overlooked the wound. His entrails had worked out and had become entangled in the brush. The forward motion of his body had done the rest. He whimpered as I laid my hand on his head. A warm red tongue flicked out at it. With tears in my eyes, I started talking to him. "Hang on, boy," I said. "Everything will be all right. I'll take care of you." With trembling hands, I unwound the entrails from the bush. With my handkerchiefs, I wiped away the gravel, leaves, and pine needles. With fingers that shook, I worked the entrails back into the wound. Knowing that I couldn't carry him in the axe and lantern, I stuck the axe deep in the side of white oak tree. I blew out the lantern and hung the handle over the other blade, wrapped my dog in my sheepskin coat, and hurried for home. Arriving home, I awakened my mother and father. Together, we doctored my dogs. Old Dan was taken care of first, very gently by Mama. Very gently, Mama worked the entrails out and in a pan of warm, soapy water, washed them clean of the pine needles, leaves, and grip. "If only I knew what I was doing," Mama said as she worked, "I'd feel better." With gentle hands, she worked the entrails back through the opening. The wound was sewn up and bandaged with a clean white cloth. With gentle hands, Little Ann wasn't hard to doctor. I held her head while Mama cleaned her wounds with peroxide. Feeling the bite of the strong liquid, she whined and licked at my hands. "It's all right, little girl," I said. "You'll be well in no time." I feel like if you're watching me at all during this, like part of you will be sad about the story, but part of you might be laughing at my reactions. I opened the door and watched her as she limped off to the doghouse. Hearing a whimper, I turned around. There in the doorway to the room stood my sisters. I could tell by the looks on their faces that they had been watching for some time. They looked pitiful standing there in the long white gowns. I felt sorry for them. "Will little Ann be all right?" my oldest sister asked. "Yes," I said. "She'll be all right. She only had one bad wound and we've taken care of that." "Old Dan's hurt bad, isn't he?" she said. I nodded my head. "How bad is it?" she asked. "It's bad," I said. "He was cut wide open." They all started crying. "Now here," Mama said, going over. "You girls get back in bed. You'll take a death of a cold being up like that in your bare feet." "Mommy," the little one said, "God won't let old Dan die, will he?" "I don't think so, honey," Mama said. "Now off to bed." They turned and walked slowly back to their room. "The way your dogs are cut up," Papa said. "Must have been a terrible fight." "It was, Papa," I said. "I never saw anything like it. Little Ann wouldn't have fought the lion if it hadn't been for old Dan. All she was doing was helping him. He wouldn't quit. He just stayed right in there till the end. I even had to pry his jaws loose from the lion's throat after the lion was dead." Glancing at old Dan, Papa said, "It's in his blood, Billy. He's a hunting hound. The best one I've ever saw. He only has two loves, you and hunting. That's all he knows." "If it hadn't been for them, Papa," I said, "I probably wouldn't be here now." "What do you mean, Mama?" I said. "You wouldn't be here now." I told him how the lion had leaped at me and how my dogs had gotten between him and me. "They were so close together," I said. "When they came up off the ground, they looked just like one." There was a moaning sigh from Mama. She covered her face with her hands and started crying. "I don't know," she sobbed. "I just don't know. To think how close he came to being killed, I don't think I can stand any more." Now, Papa said, as he walked over and put his arms around her. "Don't go all to pieces. It's all over. Let's be thankful and do our best for old Dan." "Do you think he'll die?" Papa asked. "I don't know, Billy," Papa said, shaking his head. "He's lost an awful lot of blood, and he's a mighty sick dog. All I can do now is wait and see." Our wait wasn't long. My dog's breathing grew faster and faster, and there was terrible rattling in his throat. I knelt down and laid his head in my lap. Old Dan must have known he was dying. Just before he drew one last sigh and a feeble thump of his tail, his friendly gray eyes closed forever. At first, I couldn't believe my dog was dead. I started talking to him. "Please don't die, Dan," I said. "Don't leave me now." I looked to Mama for help. Her face was as white as the bark on a sycamore tree, and the hurt in her eyes tore at my heart. She opened her mouth to say something, but words wouldn't come out. Feeling as cold as an Arctic wind, I got up and stumbled to a chair. Mama came over and said something. Her words were only a murmur in my ears. Very gently, Papa picked old Dan up in his arms and carried him out on the porch. When he came back in the house, he said, "Well, we did all we could do, but I guess it wasn't enough." I'd never seen my father and mother look so tired and weary as they did on that night. I knew they wanted to comfort me, but didn't know what to say. Papa tried. "Billy," he said, "I wouldn't think too much about this if I were you. It's not good to hurt like that. I believe I'd just try to forget it. Besides, you still have little Ann." I wasn't even thinking about little Ann at that moment. I knew she was all right. I'm thankful that I still have her," I said. "But how can I forget old Dan? He gave his life for me. That's what he did. Just laid down his life for me. How can I ever forget something like that?" Mama said, "It's been a terrible night for all of us. Let's go to bed and try to get some rest. Maybe we'll all feel better tomorrow." "No, Mama," I said. "You and Papa go on to bed. I think I'll stay up for a while." I couldn't sleep anyway. Mama started to protest, but Papa shook his head. Arm in arm, they walked from the room. Long after my mother and father had retired, I sat by the fire trying to think and couldn't. I felt numb all over. I knew my dog was dead. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to. One day they were both alive and happy. Then that night, just like that, one of them was dead. I didn't know how long I had been sitting there when I heard a noise out on the porch. I got up, walked over to the door, and listened. It came again, a low whimper and a scratchy sound. I could think of only one thing that could have made the noise. It had to be my dog. He wasn't dead. He'd come back to life with a pounding heart. I opened the door and stepped out on the porch. What I saw was more than I could stand. The noise I the noise I had heard had been my little Ann. All her life she had slept by old Dan's side. And although he was dead, she had left the doghouse. I'd come back to the porch and snuggled up close to his side. She looked up at me and whimpered. I couldn't stand it. I didn't know I was running until I tripped and fell. I got to my feet and ran on, down through our fields of shuck corn until I fell face down on the river's bank. There in the grave shadows of breaking dawn, I cried until I could cry no more. The train of gray squirrels and the bright morning sun told me it was daylight. I got to my feet and walked back to the house. Coming up through our barn lot, I saw my father feeding our stock. He came over and said breakfast was about ready. "I don't want any breakfast, Papa," I said. "I'm not hungry, and I have a job to do. I'll have to bury my dog." "I'll tell you what," he said. "I'm not going to be very busy today, so let's have a good breakfast and then I'll help you." "No, Papa," I said. "I'll take care of it. You go and eat breakfast. Tell Mama I'm not hungry." I saw a hurt look in my father's eyes. Shaking his head, he turned away. He turned and walked away. From rough pine slabs, I made a box for my dog. It was a crude box, but it was the best I could do. With strips of burlap and corn shucks, I padded the inside. Up on the hillside, at the foot of a beautiful red oak tree, I dug his grave. There, where the wild mountain flowers would grow in the spring, I laid him away. I had a purpose in burying my dog up there on the hillside. It was a beautiful spot. From there, one could see the country for miles. The long, white, crooked line of the river, the tall, thick timber of the bottoms, the sycamore, birch, and box elder. I thought perhaps that on moonlight nights old Dan would be able to hear the deep voice of the hounds as they rolled out of the river bottoms on the frosty air. After the last shovel of dirt was patted in place, I sat down and let my mind drift back through the years. I thought of the old KC baking powder can and the first time I saw my pups in the box at the depot. I thought of the $50, the nickels and dimes, and the fishermen and the blackberry patches. I looked at his grave, and with tears in my eyes, I voiced these words: "You were worth it, old friend, and 1,000 times over." In my heart, I knew that there in the grave lay a man's best friend. 2 days later, when I came in from the bottom, where my father and I were clearing land, my mother said, "Billy, you'd better look after your dog. She won't eat." I started looking for her. I went to the barn, the corn crib, and looked under the porch. Called her name. It was no use. I wandered up my sisters and asked if they had seen little Ann. The youngest one said she had seen her go down into the garden. I went there, calling her name. She wouldn't answer my call. I was about to give up, and then I saw her. She had wiggled her way far back under the thorny limbs of a blackberry bush in the corner of the garden. I talked to her and tried to coax her out. She wouldn't budge. I got down on my knees and crawled back to her. As I did, she raised her head and looked at me. Her eyes told the story. They weren't the soft gray eyes I had looked into so many times. They were dull and cloudy. There was no fire, no life. I couldn't understand. I carried her back to the house. I offered her food and water. She wouldn't touch it. I noticed how lifeless she was. I thought perhaps she had a wound I had overlooked. I felt and probed with my fingers. I could find nothing. My father came and looked at her. He shook his head and said, "Billy, it's no use. The life has gone out of her. She has no will to live." He turned and walked away. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't. With eggs and rich cream, I made a liquid. I pried her mouth open and poured it down. She responded to nothing I did. I carried her to the porch and laid her in the same place I had laid the body of old Dan. I covered her with gunny sacks. All through the night I would get up and check on her. Next morning I took warm, fresh milk, and again I opened her mouth and fed her. It was a miserable day for me. I knew it was the same. My dog had just given up. There was no will to live. That evening when I came in from the fields, she was gone. I hurried to my mother. Mama told me she had seen her go up the hollow from the house, so weak she could hardly stand. Mama had watched her until she had disappeared into the timber. I hurried up the hollow, calling her name. I called and called. I went up to the head of it, still calling her name and praying she would come to me. I climbed out onto the flats, looking, searching and calling. It was no use. My dog was gone. I had a thought, a ray of hope. I just knew I'd find her at the grave of old Dan. I hurried there. I found her lying on her stomach, her hind legs stretched out straight, her front feet folded back under her chest. She had laid her head on his grave. I saw the trail where she had dragged herself through the leaves. The way she lay there, I thought she was alive. I called her name. She made no movement. With the last ounce of her body, she had dragged herself to the grave of old Dan. Kneeling down by her side, I reached out and touched her. There was no response, no whimpering cry or friendly wag of her tail. My little dog was dead. I laid her head in my lap and with tear-filled eyes gazed up into the heavens. In a choking voice, I asked, "Why did they have to die? Why must I hurt so? What have I done wrong?" I heard a noise behind me. It was my mother. She sat down and put her arm around me. "You've done no wrong, Billy," she said. "I know this seems terrible, and I know it hurts. But one time or another, everyone suffers. Even the good Lord suffered while he was here on earth." "I know, Mama," I said, "but I can't understand. It was bad enough when old Dan died. Now little Ann is gone. Both of them gone, just like that." "Billy, you haven't lost your dogs altogether," Mama said. "You always have the memory. Besides, you can have some more dogs." I rebelled at this. "I don't want any more dogs," I said. "I won't ever want another dog. They wouldn't be like old Dan and little Ann." "We all feel that way, Billy," she said. "I do especially. They fulfilled a prayer that I thought would never be answered." "I don't believe in prayers anymore," I said. "I prayed for my dogs, and now look, both of them are dead." Mama was silent for a moment. Then in a gentle voice she said, "Billy, sometimes it's hard to believe that things like this can happen, but there's always an answer. When you're older, you'll understand better." "No, I won't," I said. "I don't care if I'm 100 years old. I'll never understand why my dogs had to die." As if she were talking to someone far away, I heard her say in a low voice, "I don't know what to say. I can't seem to find the right words." Looking up to her face, I saw that her eyes were flooded with tears. "Mama, please don't cry," I said. "I didn't mean what I said." "I know you didn't," she said, as she squeezed me up tight. "It's just your way of fighting back." I heard the voice of my father calling to us from the house. "Come now," Mama said. I have supper ready and your father wants to talk to you. I think when you've heard what he has to say, you'll feel better. I can't leave little Anne like this, Mama said. It'll be cold tonight. I think I'll carry her back to the house. No, I don't think you should do that, Mama said. Your sisters will go all to pieces. Let's make her comfortable here. Raking some dead leaves into a pile, she picked little Anne up and laid her in them. Taking off my coat, I spread it over her body. I dreaded to think of what I had to do on the morrow. My father and sisters were waiting for us on the porch. Mama told them a sad story. My sisters broke down and started crying. I ran to Mama and buried their faces in a long cotton dress. Papa came over and laid his hand on my shoulder. Billy, he said, there's a time in a boy's life when he has to stand up like a man. This is one of those times. I know what you're going through and how it hurts, but there's always an answer. The good Lord has a reason for everything he does. There couldn't be any reason for my dogs to die, Papa, I said. They're just good. They hadn't done anything wrong. But Pa glanced at Mama. Getting no help from her, he said, it's getting cold out here. Let's go in the house. I have something to show you. Guess what we're having for supper, Mama said, as we turned into the house. Your favorite, Billy. Sweet potato pie. You'll like that, won't you? I nodded my head, but my heart wasn't in it. Papa didn't follow us into the kitchen. He turned and entered his bedroom. When he came into the room, he had a small shoebox in his hand. I recognized the box by the bright blue ribbon tied around it. Mama kept her valuables in it. Silence settled over the room. Walking to the head of the table, Papa set the box down and started untying the ribbon. His hands were trembling as he fumbled with the knot. With the lid off, he reached in and started lifting out bundles of money. After stacking them in a neat pile, he raised his head and looked straight at me. Billy, he said, you know how your mother has prayed that someday we'd have enough money to move out of these hills and into towns so that you children could get an education? I nodded my head. Well, he said in a low voice, because of your dogs, her prayers have been answered. This is the money old Dan and little Ann. I've managed to make the farm feed us and clothe us, and I've saved every cent your furs brought in. We now have enough. Isn't it wonderful? Mama said. It's just like a miracle. I think it is a miracle, Papa said. Remember Billy said a prayer when he asked for his pups? And then they were your prayers. Billy got his pups. Do those dogs your prayers were answered? Yes. I'm sure it's a miracle. If he gave them to me, then why did he take them away? I asked. I think there's an answer for that too, Papa said. See, Billy, your mother and I had decided not to separate you from your dogs. We knew how much you loved them. We decided that when we moved to town, we'd leave you here with your grandpa for a while. He needs help anyway. I guess the good Lord didn't want that to happen. He doesn't like to see families split up. That's why they were taken away. I knew my father was a firm believer in fate. To him, everything that happened was the will of God. And in his Bible, he could always find the answers. Papa could see that his talk had very little effect on me. With a sorrowful look on his face, he sat down and said, let us give thanks for our food and for all the wonderful things God has done for us. I'll say a special prayer and ask him to help Billy. I barely heard what Papa said. During the meal, I could tell that no one was enjoying the food. As soon as it was over, I went to my room and lay down on the bed. Mama came in. Why don't you go to bed, she said, and get a good night's sleep. You'll feel better tomorrow. No, I won't, Mama, I said. I'll have to bury little Ann tomorrow. I know, she said, as she turned my covers down. I'll help if you want me to. No, Mama, I said. I don't want anyone to help. I'd rather do it all by myself. Billy, you're always doing things by yourself, Mama said. That's not right. Everyone needs help sometime in his life. I know, Mama, I said, but please, not this time. Ever since my dogs, we've always been together, just us three. We hunted together, played together, we even went swimming together. Did you know, Mom, The little Ann used to come every night and peek in my window just to see if I was all right. I guess that's why I want to be by myself when I bury her. Now say your prayers and go to sleep. I'm sure you'll feel better in the morning. I didn't feel like saying any prayers that night. I was hurting too much. Long after the rest of the family had gone to bed, I lay staring into the darkness, trying to think and not able to. Sometime in the night, I got up, tiptoed to my window, and looked out at my doghouse. It looked so lonely and empty sitting there in the moonlight. I could see that the door was slightly ajar. I thought of the many times I had lain in my bed and listened to the squeaking of the door as my dogs went in and out. I didn't know I was crying until I felt the tears roll down my cheeks. Mama must have heard me get up. She came in and put her arms around me. "Billy," she said, in a quivering voice, "you'll just have to stop this. You're gonna make yourself sick, and I don't think I can stand any more of it." "I can't, Mama," I said. "It hurts so much. I just can't. I don't want you to feel bad just because I do." "I can't help it, Billy," she said. "Come now and get back in bed. I'm afraid you'll catch a cold." After she had tucked me in, she sat on the bed for a while. As if she were talking to the darkness, I heard her say, "If only there was some way I could help, something I could do." "No one can help, Mama," I said. "No one can bring my dogs back." "I know," she said, as she got up to leave the room. "If there must be something, there just has to be." After Mama had left the room, I buried my face in my pillow and cried myself to sleep. The next morning, I made another box. It was smaller than the first one. Each nail I drove in the rough pine boards caused the knot in my throat to get bigger and bigger. My sisters came to help. They stood for a while. Then, with tears streaming, they ran for the house. I buried little Ann by the side of old Dan. I knew that was where she wanted to be. I also buried a part of my life along with my dog. Remembering a sandstone ledge I had seen while prowling the woods, I went there, picked out a nice stone, and carried it back to the graves. Then, with painstaking care, I carved their names deep in its red surface. As I stood looking at the two graves, I tried hard to understand some of the things my father had told me, but I couldn't. I was still hurting and still had that empty feeling. I went to Mama and had a talk with her. "Mama," I asked, "do you think God made a heaven for all good dogs?" "Yes," she said. "I'm sure he did." "Do you think he made a place for dogs to hunt? You know, just like we have here in our place, with mountains and sycamore trees, rivers and cornfields and old rail fences? Do you think he did?" "From what I've read in the good book, Billy," she said, "he put far more things up there than we ever have here. Yes, I'm sure he did." I was thinking this was over when Mama came up to me and started tucking my shirt up. "Do you feel better now?" she asked. "It still hurts, Mama," I said as I buried my face in her dress. "But I do feel a little better." "I'm glad," she said. She patted my head. "I don't like to see my little boy hurt like this." Chapter 20. The following spring, we left the Ozarks. The day we moved, I thought everyone would be sad, but it was just the opposite. Mama seemed to be the happiest one of all. I could hear her laughing and joking with my sisters as they packed things up. She had a glow in her eyes I had never seen before, and it made me feel good. I even noticed a change in Papa. He didn't have that whipped look on his face anymore. He was in high spirits as we carried the furniture out to our wagon. After the last item was stored in the wagon, Papa helped Mama to the spring seat, and we were ready to go. "Papa, would you mind waiting for a few minutes?" I asked. "I'd like to say goodbye to my dogs." "Sure," he said, smiling. "We have plenty of time. Go right ahead." Near the graves, I saw something different. It looked like a wild bush had grown up and practically covered the two little mounds. It made me angry to think that an old bush would dare grow so close to the graves. I took out my knife, intending to cut it down. When I walked up close enough to see what it was, I sucked in a mouthful of air and stopped. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There, between the graves, a beautiful red fern had sprung up from the rich mountain soil. It was fully 2 feet tall, and its long red leaves had reached out in rainbow arches carved over the graves of my dogs. I had to hold the old Italian legend about the red fern. How a little Indian boy and girl were lost in a blizzard and frozen to death. In the spring, when they were found, a beautiful red fern had grown up between their bodies. The story went on to say that only an angel could plant the seeds of a red fern, and that they never died. Where one grew, that spot was sacred. Remembering the meaning of the legend, I turned and started howling for Mama. Mama! Mama! I shouted. Come here! Hurry! You won't believe it. In a frightened voice, she shouted back, What is it, Billy? Are you all right? I'm all right, Mama, I shouted. But hurry, you just won't believe it. Holding her lawn skirt in her hand with a frightened look on her face, Mama came puffing up the hillside. Close behind her came Papa and my sisters. What is it, Billy? Mama asked in a scared voice. Are you all right? Look, I said, pointing at the red fern. Staring wide-eyed, Mama gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. I heard her say, almost in a whisper, Oh, oh, it's red fern, a sacred red fern. She walked over and very tenderly and started fingering the long red leaves. In an awed voice, she said, All my life I've wanted to see one. Now I have. It's almost unbelievable. Don't touch it, Mama, my oldest sister whispered. It was planted by an angel. Mama smiled and asked, Have you heard the legend? Yes, Mama, my sister said. Grandma told me the story and I believe it too. The serious look on his face, Papa said, These cells are full of legends. Up until now, I've never paid much attention to them. But now I don't know. Perhaps there is something to the legend of the red fern. Maybe this is God's way of helping Billy understand why his dogs died. I'm sure it is, Papa said. And I do understand. I feel different now and I don't hurt anymore. Come, Mama said. Let's go back to the wagon. Billy wants to be alone with his dogs for a while. Just as I turned to leave, I heard Papa murmur in a low voice, Wonderful indeed it is, the work of our Lord. As I stood looking at the two graves, I noticed things I hadn't seen before. Wild violets, rooster heads, and mountain daisies had completely covered the two little mounds. A summer breeze gushed down from the rugged hills. I felt its warm caress as it fanned my face. It hummed a tune in the underbrush and rustled the leaves on the huge red oak. The red fern wavered and danced to the music of the hills. Taking off my cap, I bowed my head. In a choking voice, I said, Goodbye, old Dan, little hand. I'll never forget you. And this I know. If God made room in heaven for all good dogs, I know he made a special place for you. With a heavy heart, I turned and walked away. I knew that as long as I lived, I'd never forget the two little graves and the sacred red fern. Not far from our home, the road wound its way up and over a hill. At the top, Papa stopped the team. We all stood up and looked back. It was a beautiful sight, one I'll never forget. As I stood and looked at the home of my birth, it looked sad and lonely. There was no spiral of lazy blue smoke twisting from the rock chimney, no white leghorn hen chasing a June bug, no horse or cow standing with head down and tail switching. I saw I had left the door to the barn loft open. A tuft of hay hung out. It wavered gently in the warm summer breeze. Something scurried across the vacant yard and disappeared under the barn. It was Sammy, our house cat. I heard my little sister say in a choking voice, Mommy, we forgot Sammy. There was no answer. To the left, I could see our fields and the zigzag lines of rail fences. Farther down, I could see the shimmering whiteness of the tall sycamores. My vision blurred as tears came to my eyes. The sorrowful silence was broken by my mother's voice. She asked, Billy, can you see it? See what, Mama? I asked. The red fern, she said. My older sister spoke up. I can see it, she said. Over my eyes, I looked to the hillside. Above our home, there it stood in all its wild beauty, a waving red banner and a carpet of green. It seemed to be saying, Goodbye, and don't worry, for I'll always be here. Hearing a sniffling, I turned around. My three little sisters had started crying. Mama said something to Papa. I heard the jingle of the trace chains as they tightened in the single trees. Our wagon moved on. I have never been back to the Ozarks. All I have left are my dreams and memories. But if God is willing, someday I'd like to go back to those beautiful hills. I like to walk again on trails I walked in my boyhood days. Once again, I'd like to face a mountain breeze and smell the wonderful scent of the redbuds and papaws in the dogwoods. With my hands, I'd like to caress the cool white bark of a sycamore. I'd like to take a walk far back in the flinty hills and search for a souvenir. On an old double-bitted axe stuck deep in the side of a white oak tree. Another handle has long since rotted away with time. Perhaps the rusty frame of a coal oil lantern still hangs there on the blade. I'd like to see the old home place, the barn and the rail fences. I'd like to pause under the beautiful oaks where my sisters and I played in our childhood. I'd like to walk up the hillside to the graves of my dogs. I'm sure the red fern has grown and has completely covered the two little mounds. I know it's still there, hiding its secret beneath those long red leaves. But it wouldn't be hidden from me for part of my life. It's buried there too. Yes, I know. It is still there, for in my heart, I believe the legend of this sacred red fern. Yeah, it's the whole book. Alright, I finished it. I read the book. Kind of thought that might be the way to end. I don't feel like that's an Old Yeller ending. You said Old Yeller. I feel like it's more of a Balto. Isn't Balto? There's a book I read as a kid. Um, kid. There's Stone Fox. Maybe it's Stone Fox. I don't remember if that's the book. It might be Stone Fox. Yeah, I think it's Stone Fox. It's not Balto. It should be Stone Fox. Yeah, it ends a lot like Stone Fox. It was also a good book. I don't know. Maybe we just keep reading sad books in this nature. Maybe I can read Stone Fox next or something. Mm. It was a good book, though. Mm. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy the reading. I don't know if you'll want to. I feel like my voice was wavering on this last part, so I don't know if you'll want to listen to it. Like on some level, I think you might to like finish it. But if you rewatch some of these, I don't know if you'll want to re-listen to that. uh, I think Section 8 was just the hunt and the gold trophy. Maybe it was 9. Probably 9. I don't know. It was a good book, though. You're set to land in 31 minutes. It means I got 30 minutes to just get my voice back, relax, not be in a somewhat sad state. I love you. I've enjoyed making this. I do hope you get. I do hope you enjoy it too. I don't know if you'll actually find the time to listen to these, or if you'll be too busy with school, too busy with work, or just even if you just want to not think about me. I do hope that if you do listen to these, you enjoy it. definitely enjoyed thinking about you while I did it. I'll be looking forward to seeing you the next time I get back to the circus. Although we are confirmed to at least be here for one more day. So, yeah. Yeah. I'll at least be here one more day. I love you, YiBo. And I hope your classes go well. I hope work is going well. I hope everything goes well while I'm gone. And I just, and if, and I can't wait to come back so I can be there for you. I know I won't be in Atlanta to actually make anything easier. And if I was in Atlanta, it'd probably just be a distraction. Yeah, at least I'll be able to talk to you. I love you so much. Can't wait to marry you when I get back.